cases of any country in the world, followed by Brazil. There's been a paradox in the world experience of COVID as we've been inoculating more and more people with vaccines. The virus is showing itself to be amazingly intelligent and resilient, and is adapting itself with various variants. And so the overall world situation continues to deteriorate in many countries. China reported over the weekend that its vaccines haven't worked with nearly the effectiveness that they needed to inoculate 1 billion people. So they're beginning to reach out to the West and other countries to bring in the vaccines. And so as we celebrate spring and we move into 2021 with as much robustness as we can, we all continue to be challenged. And Humanity Rising continues with the pandemic day by day to bring news about the world and to mostly just celebrate human goodness and human creativity as people worldwide continue to work 24/7, 365 to ensure that the world beyond the pandemic is more resilient, abundant, healthy, and in alignment with natural systems and constraints. One of our practices with which we start every session is just simple heart coherence. In the midst of all the tumult and the chaos and the centrifugal forces that are gripping our world, just pausing and centering yourself in your body, taking a few deep breaths, closing your eyes, and placing your attention on your heart. Listen to your heartbeat for just a minute in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. And now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to commence our program by just noting that we're coming to one of my favorite parts of Humanity Rising since we started in January with our sessions, and that is our global celebration of one of our world treasures, the scientist and humanitarian and psychonaut of our time, Dr. Stan Grof. His birthday, his 90th birthday, is on July 1st in several months' time. but working with a number of partners from around the world, we have been celebrating this great and noble spirit starting in January and then once a month through June. We want to celebrate different aspects of Stan's life and extraordinary work. And today we want to delve into what is arguably his singular achievement, his initial work starting in 1956 when he first did his initial session with LSD, and then went on to pioneer with a number of others research into LSD primarily, but that has led worldwide to research on the efficacy of psychedelics in therapeutic healing of the soul. This led Stan to describe a cartography of the psyche that was a breakthrough following on the insights of Freud and Jung. And in many ways, Stan Grof is the singular successor to these great pioneers delving into the unconscious of the human psyche. It was Stan that coined the term holotropic, indicating that psychedelic therapeutic work and also the holotropic breath work that he also pioneered with a number of others leads inexorably, if it's practiced and utilized intentionally, to wholeness and to the creation of a holotropic singularity of the psyche and the soul and the heart and the body. And so today we want to delve into these domains of his research. And to do so, I want to thank very deeply Susan Hess-Loger, who's a award-winning documentary filmmaker who's been working with Stan for many years and developed and produced and directed the latest documentary on Stan, and Brigitte, his wife, and the research that he's done called Voyage of the Psychonaut. So Susan, it's a pleasure to welcome you back to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. And so 7 years ago, I met Stan and began working on this documentary called The Way of the Psychonaut, Stanislav Grof and the Journey of Consciousness. And this has been a most remarkable process for me because Stan and his wife, Brigitte, worked with me to verify the accuracy. We tried to show the process that Stan went through to develop his insights and discoveries so that it would become easier for people to understand and see how they might undertake such a journey themselves. And so today, the focus of this tribute is the art of psychedelic sitting, because this is how we avoid backlash to the renaissance that's now taking place with the thought and the use of psychedelics as a means of deep healing and working beyond the trauma that has so impacted society and seems to keep us from doing the things we need to do to meet the current challenges. And so today, our guests are Rick Doblin, the founder and director of MAPS, and Diane Haug, who was one of the first of Stan's students, along with Rick, in learning holotropic breathwork. And of course, Brigitte Grof, who's also one of our experts today, probably one of the first of Stan's students learning the breathwork. And of course, Stan himself, who developed this process through his many years of research in Czechoslovakia. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to let Stan take the focus now because he is going to share something with us. Go ahead, Stan, it's all yours.
Well, hello, everybody. And thank you very much, Jim and Susan for you have been sort of following this ubiquity from January, and hopefully we are going to pay all the way to the 1st of July. We have done it already several times, and I would like to repeat what I always did, what has to be done. That 2.5 years ago, I had a stroke, which was not one that was any kind of a
paralyzed.
No paralyzed, no with hands or legs, but was hit very much to my speech. So we have Brigitte here in two different roles. She is going to be this time a presenter, but she's also sitting here, what she was doing in the past. Whenever I have a problem with the word, she will help me. I would like to say something that we didn't say in the biography, that we have known each other for over 35 years, yeah. And she was in SLN at the time when we have not yet the training. So she was the first one really who was the student. And we've 6th year we had a reunion when for
6 years ago.
the 5th,
Yeah.
and we now had a wedding
anniversary.
an anniversary for
5 years.
5 years, yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, Jim and Susan, and thank the three of you who are coming as a presenter today. It's an amazing thing for having this incredible reunion with wonderful people. You know, Diane and Rick and Brigitte, of course, yeah. So we are talking about psychedelics today. We're going to be 90 years old, and 65 years of that I spent in psychedelics and non-ordinary states of consciousness. So I will say a little of how I went through these years from the beginning to where we are now. I actually started working with LSD long before I could have an experience myself. I was in the fourth anniversary. I was in the fourth year of my medicine, and we got LSD from Sanders. And my presenters was a docent, Robicek. He was very interested in LSD at the time, you know, to spend 6 hours with patients. So he used us as gophers, and I was sitting basically in all free time in the clinics, seeing people with psychiatrists, psychologists, artists, and so on. So I was sitting there and you know, wetting my palate.
Whetting your appetite.
Anyway, what I watch, you know, these incredible experiences, and I simply didn't have it, couldn't have it myself. So it was in in November, right after my predication, I was then had my first fantastic experience, and it was a powerful mystical experience that changed my life, basically personally as well as professionally. So I started this for almost 2 years, basically doing laboratory work. We had work with LSD, with psilocybin, with mescaline, and people were having enormous number of investigations of various kinds. There was not a focus on the experiences, so they really didn't know very much what was happening. But in some of the period between these investigations, I realized enough, what was happening is these persons, and I realized that there was something amazing that was happening, which was an incredible interindividually and interindividually variability. So when you take once, let's say LSD or psilocybin or whatever, and you do it again, or you do first when you work with other people under the same circumstances, each experience would have a completely different font. And also, if we then repeated these experiences, then each of these experience was very different. So I realized that we were really not doing pharmacology, yeah. And I just completely lost interest in pharmacology and take it into clinics. And we had initially LSD from Sandoz, but we actually developed our own in Prague. They had very good people on developing ergot, and so they created their own LSD. So we had the only other country as Switzerland and Czechoslovakia at the time was the only who had pure LSD. So initially, we wanted to use LSD in patients who were very difficult and also didn't help by anything else before, anything that was available at the time. So we were started in these kinds of patients. And we started with slower dosages, actually, with medium dosage, I would say, between, let's say, 100 to 250 afterwards. And it was a really, really amazing situation to take people, one session after another and seeing how they unfolded the psyche step after step. My patients talked this, that it was like a onion peeling with psyche, or the other one was anyway,
I don't know.
When you know. Anyway,
Maybe Susan
archaeology.
Archaeology.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like
chemical
archaeology. Yeah.
Okay.
Step after step. Now this was very, very interesting because what I found out was that the experiences that were in the unconscious, the traumatic experiences, they were not like a mosaic kind of a situation, but they were arranging sort of in stages, which I called the Haug, coex experiences, where people have experiences in different stages, at different times of her life, and have experiences that have very simple, even the same kind of emotions or the same kind of physical sensations. And then he found out that as we continued, it actually take us all the way to an entirely new realm at that time, which is to biological birth. And I actually was able to create 4 of these stages, the BPM 1, 2, 3, 4, which was something that related to the stages of birth. And the first experience was at the end of
Pregnancy. The end of pregnancy.
The pregnancy, before anything starts, that the first BPM was a situation where this birth started, but the cervix is not open.
That's the second. The second stage.
The second, yes.
Yes.
And then the third was when the birth actually started moving, the contractions started, but there was a very, very difficult still time to get through this. What was happening, something very interesting and new, was that as people experiencing the third matrix, that also experience sexual sensations, very powerful sexual sensations, which was very, very interesting. Find out how all kinds of sexual problems actually start already in the birth process. So I should say that we, at the beginning, the stages were milder. They were from 100 to 200 to 15. But I found out that actually doing the small dosages and gradually, that those are not the best result.
It was called the psycholytic, right? The psycholytic
That was called
approach.
the psycholytic. We actually had these small dosages, but there was a whole series of these experiences. And also at the beginning, we allowed people to open their eyes, walking around, looking at us. We were talking. So we learned a lot about the insides of these experiences, but it was not really very powerful resolution. So during that time, I found out that it was much better if I increased the doses, and actually started using music. And so then when I came for the first time to America, we were actually using just very high dosages, but we could not have more than 3 sessions, with the exception of cancer patients, where they depend more on how long they survive. But all the others, we could give only 3 sessions, which was very bad situation, because if something would not resolve at the end, it was very difficult, because usually we found out that the best results are when there is actually good resolution of the end. So I will later say how I found out that there's a possibility to resolve somehow the session. Initially we just had to wait it and see what happens, if it's going to be a good session or not. In Prague, when we had the possibility of using any number of patients, we just waited 10 days when there is a resistance until that time, and then we had another session. So maybe I'll go back to it when we get to the breathwork.
Would you like
So-
to share how you were being trained to be working with psychedelics at that time?
Yeah, thank you. Well, what we did, we knew that people had to have experiences themselves before they can do work with other patients. And we had the possibility to do it in Prague, both with LSD and psilocybin. So we had a situation where people had to have 3 high-dose sessions before they could have think about having their own experiences with patients. And after these 3 high-dose sessions themselves, they had to also do 30 sessions with patients under supervision. And then when everything was fine, then they had their own experiences with patients. Now, when I was living at that time from Czechoslovakia, we had over 40 people in different countries who had doing LSD sessions with patients. So I think comparable number, Rick would know, the comparable situation was about 70 people all over America at the time. They were having sessions. So that was, it was quite a situation in Czechoslovakia at the time, that we had our own LSD and then psilocybin, and actually can give it to quite a few people. Now, when I arrived to Baltimore, Spring Grove situation, I was initially supposed to work in the Johns Hopkins University, and I was start a new research with psychedelics. And when I came there, about a week before that time, they came research about psilocybin, about doing an LSD experience on a tubes with cells, with blood cells.
Blood cells. Studying the leukocytes, the blood cells.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were some changes in it. So then there became a real hysteria that people can get, develop damage in people who are women who are pregnant and so on. Which turned out to be complete nonsense. But I couldn't start this new project in Johns Hopkins University, but incredible synchronicity. There was the only of these, I think about 70 places that continued still working with LSD, was in Baltimore. So initially I could just use half time in Baltimore and half in
Spring Grove.
Yeah.
Spring Grove.
So we had actually tested this. You would see those who say LSD psychotherapy. I had to spend at that time 40 pages at the end in the appendix dealing with this problem, with these problems of what can happen to babies, when the mothers have taken. And they also were talking about possible that the cancer would be caused by LSD. So I still have 40 pages at that time for dealing with this. And we finally resolved it because we had pure LSD in Baltimore. And we used that arrogant agent, arrogance,
Arrogance?
That's a difficult word. So
Okay, well,
reagens, that you use for the
reagents,
reagents, right,
reagents
so
class.
yeah,
I don't know.
okay.
What is the word in English? Reagents?
Reagent.
Where you make
What you
the
use, the
experiments in
things
this
that you
like
use- that you
glass
use
tube
for-
in chemistry.
Yeah,
The
you
long-
put it into
the
the
long-
tube. Yeah.
Test tube? Test
So,
tube,
yeah.
I guess.
And we had this method, which was by Tio, T-J-I-O. So we had him ourselves here, and we gave it to people after big dosages, you know, which were 30, 40 to 60. And he found anything. The Tio was actually checking this, and he had no changes, you know,
In the cells,
And
in the blood
in
cells.
his own method. And actually, at that time, we also got blood from Tim Leary, and by the time he must have had only hundreds of LSD, and he didn't find any difference between our patient who had 3 sessions and Tim Leary. So that was the end of it. And nobody's laughing about it when somebody talks about it.
Yeah.
Now, I should say we were using these highest dosages, but only 3 sessions for some reason. I don't know why. 3 was difficult. Not difficult, but 40 would be bad, you know. Somebody came up with this idea. And it's really bad because people should have continuation, you know, not sort of start in the middle. But that was the problem. The other thing was we were allowed to have all our sessions. Actually, we should have it. And one of the things that we were doing this research was besides alcoholics and neurotics, and of course the cancer patient, and then there was one more that we had narcotic patients. Yeah. Now we had people, psychologists, who what they do, checking, you know, before and after what happens. And again, in the system, it was that they were not allowed to have an LSD session.
The scientists.
In other words, people who were preparing it before the sessions, and those who were looking at the follow-up, they were not allowed
to have substances.
Sessions.
So
that was a very interesting situation. They when it's asked why it was we said that because psychiatrists, psychologists have taken LSD, their mind is sort of impaired, you know.
They will not be objective anymore.
They will not be objective, you know. Then we sort of, although we have to supposed to be in questionnaires and so on. It's not us, you know, just talking how great the sessions were, but it was very objective done so it was a nonsense again. So those were very, very good results there. In this alcoholic patients and the narconaps, the alcoholics was over 50%. You know, we had follow-up for a year. We had 6 to 12 afterwards, I remember. So those were really making results, and the narcomans, they had about 30% we always had for these people in the narcotic issues, we had to see them every day, to go to half house. They had to take the results from, so we can every day we can see how if they take it or not. So then in that situation was that we decided to go to SLN for a year, and I found Michael Murphy, who said, you know, Stan, why don't you go? You're supposed to do work on a book, you know, about the LSD. Why don't you do it in SLN? SLN is a great place. And so I got a house there, beautiful, right on the ocean. And then I had to do. I had to have every. That was every. I don't know how many.
Wednesday.
No, this was
Every month.
There was 6 days and
workshops.
Sessions. So I was trading basically for the food and house and these experiences in SLN. Now those were not psychedelic experiences. That was the problem. I was just talking what experiences we had in Prague and what experiences we had in Baltimore. I was talking about the experiences and so on, and I was showing a lot of the paintings that I had and so on. And people said that's very interesting, but you know they were really bored because they said, you know, you talk about these incredible experiences, just like when I began it, you know, in my clinic, where I was watching, and I couldn't have it. So they say, well, don't you have a stash somewhere? You know, you'd like to have some experience, and of course, you know. That was not possible at SLN, and that's officially at least. And so I was thinking, you know, what we could do, and then finally had that experience that in Prague and in Baltimore, and people who had unresolved sessions, that we can do something about it. And this was for the first time. It happened when one of my patients was coming down of the LSD session and was not in a good place. Was very, very angry and had a lot of pain in the shoulder. And when I came to there, it said, "Could you put this on my shoulder? Could you push? I think if I could get it through it, I would feel better." And I was doing it, and for a while he says, "No, more." And after a while, he started rounding, started screaming, started coughing, and you know, with very short, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, we were resolved and feeling wonderful, you know, relaxed and laughing and so on. And another one, the situation where it happened with nausea, when I also again put a belly and this enormous
throwing up,
and
yeah, sounds.
And again, very, very quickly, this was resolved. And so I started seeing that I can do something with people. And when they were not being well resolved, I would say, what is happening in your body, you know, and then ask people to intentuate it and so on, and then express what was coming out emotionally on physically. And what happened at that time, that some of the people who were doing this kind of body work with me, they started suddenly breathing very fast. And they were very surprised. They told me, you know, this drug is wearing off. And I am like in the middle of the session, everything is amplified. So I get the sense that actually you can do something with the unconscious by using breathing, faster breathing. And that was the beginning to holotropic breathwork. And I say I've run more the time than I wanted, so I think we can end it. And,
okay. Yeah, well, and I think if I remember the story correctly, Rick Doblin was one of those people that showed up at Esalen hoping for something more. And, you know, and Brigitte, actually, you have really evolved this idea of body work. I've participated in breath work when Brigitte is one of the facilitators, and the breath work is, you know, when it is accompanied with the body work is so powerful. And so I'm going to hand it over to Brigitte, who herself has her own practice in Germany as a psychotherapist and has trained people throughout Germany and really was one of Stan's first students before there even was a training. So I would love you to talk about your experience of how this has evolved for you before we bring Diane and Rick in.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Well, I had the incredible fortune to be able to come to Esalen in 1986, and I stayed there for a year, and I was in these two of these months-long seminars with Stan and Christina, and had the chance to work with them in all the workshops. And so the work with holotropic states really became my passion and my profession, and has been with me my whole life. And so I also was joining a 3-year training, which in German speaking, the same like Diane and Rick did in the States. And that was a wonderful format to be for 3 years in one group. And so we could enjoy, you know, Stan's gift of the incredible knowledge he has brought back to humanity about who we really are, the spiritual knowledge and the discoveries he has made for psychology, the perinatal level, the transpersonal level. So this has been a fantastic training. And of course, the other very important part was to have the practical experiences, because you know, this is not like, oh, we are the doctor and the others are the patients. And so we learn to go through these experiences ourselves, and also learn to accompany people who have these experiences. And also it's a fantastic way to approach the psyche, which is to understand and trust that there's a inner healing intelligence in all of us that can be activated and permitted to happen. The concept of the inner healing intelligence, the divine that is transforming and healing, the Shakti as known in Eastern systems. In the West, we live so much in our head, and we need to have a plan. And this is really the opposite. We're learning to listen to what wants to happen from within, and I absolutely love that concept. And so that's the special gift of that work that Stan, together with Christina, has developed, the holotropic breathwork. And also the same approach is to work with psychedelics. You know, it's not that there is an expert who knows the plan, but it's the work comes from within. The psychedelic medicine would activate this process and we would be sitting with the people following that process. So, and there's elements like the music, the body work that Stan has already explained. And it's really important to learn that attitude properly, and also to be very ethical in being with people, because it also includes the touching and the holding and so on. And it's really important to be very clean and clear in service of what the person needs. So we have in last year, we have launched our Grof Legacy training. It's a training of working with holotropic states of consciousness that we are authorizing wonderful teachers around the world to lead their own trainings. And so the idea here is that people can learn the holotropic breath work, which we also call Grof breath work. It's the same. You will find the trademark Grof we have created to represent and protect Stan's work without any profit for us. And so people also would learn to be with people who have these experiences spontaneously, like a spiritual emergency or emergence, or who are in the process of dying. And of course, right now, especially needed learning to be psychedelic sitters. And that's even possible without psychedelics, because you also can only use them or train with them where it's legally possible. But it's actually, when you go through the holotropic, the Grof breathwork experiences, you learn so much about the process. You know, it's one process coming from different reasons, and so we can really actually teach people to sit with people and have their own experiences through the breath work. And it's especially now in the psychedelic renaissance that is amazing, and we are very happy to see. But it's also really, really important to handle that with care. So, I mean, psychedelics are powerful spiritual tools for inner transformation and healing. And it's not about a pill. I mean, psychedelics are not like a pain pill or something like that. It's a tool, and it's connected with process. The healing comes from the process, and the process needs to be accompanied properly. So we need to create a lot of training that also Diane and Rick are specialists in, to really make this safe, you know, because we want this renaissance of psychedelics to lead to a healing for humanity, and not to another shutdown because it's not handled properly. So that's really our mission these days. And so that's the right time to hand this over to Diane, because she's our main expert and teacher in the US for that. And she's very experienced in training psychedelic sitters. And so I think I'll just pass the word to you, Diane.
Okay, thank you, Brigitte. Jim, I'm so moved to be here. And I'm so moved by what you're doing. It's a beautiful tribute to Stan. And I don't think I appreciated it until this morning, the space that you're holding as he's moving toward his 90th birthday. So really incredible work. Thank you so much. And to you, Susan. For those of us who love Stan, this is just feels so important to be doing this at this point in time. So Susan, I'd like to check in with you as our moderator. Just, I want to be sensitive to time. This morning has had a life of its own, or it has a life of its own, as it should be. And I know that Rick has a lot to share too. So obviously this is not going to be a course in psychedelic sitting, but I would like to just share a little bit about my own trajectory. And start by saying I'm one of the panelists that also has a vocal challenge in life. I actually live with a medical condition that sometimes affects my vocal cords. And so I'm always sensitive, a little self-conscious, especially in a situation like this. But for those of you in the audience, if you have a concern about the quality of my voice, know that I absolutely, that I'm in no discomfort. I'm totally healthy, and it's actually good for me to be talking more. So I, my first encounter with Stan came as a result of my own background and interest in end-of-life care. And I was living in Austin, Texas at that time. I knew Stan's work only through one of his early titles, a book called The Human Encounter with Death. So when Stan came to Austin in 1986, I made the association, Death and Dying, Stan Grof. I got myself to the lecture, and I literally, my mind was blown just meeting Stan, listening to him speak. It was my first exposure to transpersonal psychology as a field. And certainly his cartography was absolutely brand new to me, but it was a really deep affirmation of so many things that I had experienced and been thinking about. So that was a huge opening, but that weekend also included a day of holotropic breathwork, which I was totally unfamiliar with. I allowed myself the opportunity, and that too was just absolutely, that weekend changed my life. Stan's work has absolutely informed my adult life, personally, professionally. And the thing that actually was so striking was to hear a man of Stan's stature, his scholarship, such an erudite person with mastery over so many disciplines. The take home for me it was a simple statement, but it affected me so profoundly. And Brigitte has already mentioned this, but I'll put my own, I'll use my own words, and that's this profound concept that there is an intrinsic intelligence inherent in the body and the psyche and the human heart and our soul's trajectory through this lifetime. And that as helpers, it's our work to create the optimal conditions for people to access that inner wisdom. And that so matched my own life experience as a younger professional. But when I heard Stan just synthesize that information and knowledge and scholarship to that simple statement, it was penetrating, it was compelling, and that really stuck with me. So my intersection with Stan, just to put it in perspective, came at the end of his 14-year, I'll say that again, 14-year tenure as scholar in residence at Esalen. He and his late wife, Christina, were just leaving Esalen. Stan felt ready to teach, to offer a transmission to his transmission to a greater audience. And that night in Austin, Texas, in 1986, he said to all of us, I'm looking for 30 students who would be willing to study with me for 3 years. And I had the good fortune of just having the freedom in my life to do that, raise my hand, and the rest is history for me. So my deep immersion with Stan's work and in a training capacity actually started at the end of the 80s. And it was especially the decade of, excuse me, the decade that followed that we took the training on the road. I had the good fortune of being with Stan and other friends and colleagues as we started traveling around the world, South America first, Scandinavia second, Central Europe, and for me, ongoing work in Russia, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and introducing not psychedelics, because of course this was a period of prohibition, but really introducing people to not only transpersonal psychology, but to the experiential tool that you've heard Brigitte and Stan both talk about. And so many people associate Stan with psychedelics, but there was actually a 25-year period in there where our primary focus was via the breath work. And it was incredible to have a tool that made working in expanded states of consciousness more available to a greater number of people who for all kinds of reasons might never be able to access a psychedelic experience. And we learned that for so many people, the breath work itself, just that simple practice of an enhanced breathing process supported with music, supported with body work, the integrative arts that follow that, that too is a phenomenally profound tool. And at this point in my journey with Stan's work, I feel it absolutely stands alone with the psychedelic experience. I've had so many people, even really experienced psychonauts, report that they have had breathwork experiences that have rivaled any psychedelic experience that they've ever had in terms of the value and meaning offered. So Brigitte did such a beautiful job of, I think, summarizing the just the strategy, the orientation that we take in the work. But I will actually say a few things about sitting as it applies to breath work and as it applies to psychedelics. And this is my own language. I actually have come to think about sitting as a practice really akin to meditation, actually a lot of similarities that actually has incredible application in a life's journey. So for me, sitting is so much about the quality of attention with an A and intention with an I that actually creates the healing context or the field for people. It is really the presence that we bring to another, I think, that makes the critical difference that really impacts the outcome of the work. So attention, intention, when I talk about its similarity to meditation practice, for me as a sitter, I think to approach the task at hand in a way we might approach meditation practice is about being kind of centered, to being grounded, assuming a posture, and not even necessarily a physical posture, but a posture of, again, beginning to quiet the mind, beginning to open the heart, staying totally awake, totally engaged, but without the focus on doing. I think sitting is so much about qualities of being, B-E-I-N-G, as opposed to doing. And so a sitter from our perspective is not there to fix. They're not there to analyze, interpret, it's that quality of being in my very short time with you that I'd like to stress. I, at this point in my journey, because of course holotropic breath work we've had to take a hiatus from that work in relation to public health issues. So I have really become much more involved in two projects in this year that allowed me to focus on these themes theoretically, for unfortunately not practically. One being a position that I'm a role that I have with the California Institute of Integral Studies this year. They have a certificate program. It's a 10-month certificate program under the auspices, the umbrella of the Center for Psychedelically Assisted Therapy and Research. And in that capacity, I am bringing Stan's theoretical work and in the past, the practical exposure to the breath work to actually literally hundreds of licensed professionals who are who are very interested in becoming psychedelic therapists. And I'm so pleased to have been invited to represent Stan's work in that context. And I think it's incredible exposure for those psychedelic therapists to be. I'm also, I feel very privileged to be identified by Stan and Brigitte as one of their kind of authorized teachers here in the United States, with my good friend, Jay Dufresneau, who is with me. We are co-directors of the new Grof Legacy Training USA. And I think you'll see a link to what we're doing here in the United States on the chat function. We decided to wait until 2021 to launch our program here in the US. We're in our development stages. We're building our board. We've applied for nonprofit status here in the US, and we're building our curriculum. Thanks to Jay, we have a website to present to you that will only continue to grow and get better. But thank you, Jay, for your push over the last 2 weeks to get that ready for this program. So this is just a portion of what I was prepared to share. But Susan, I think I will pause. I want to make sure that Rick has an opportunity to introduce himself, and I assume that there might be some interaction that we'll all share together. But I've really appreciated this, Jim. Thank you so much. It's really heartwarming to be here with you all. So.
Thank you, Diane. I want to say that my introduction to breathwork and to Stan was through a training that Diane was in charge of in Taos, New Mexico. And that's when I met you, Diane. And that's when I was introduced to Stan and heard him speak. And that was my inspiration to make the documentary. So I have a strong connection to you from that. Wow. And it's also the perfect opportunity to introduce Rick, because Rick Doblin, as in the process of making the movie, I remember I asked Rick if he would chat with me, because I was asking him, what legal jeopardy do I risk if I talk about my psychedelic experiences in the movie? And he said none. So I went ahead and dropped him into the movie. Rick has been an incredible force. I believe it's 30 years that you've been developing this approach to legalizing psychedelic substances so that they can become once again available as a therapeutic tool and in people's own personal lives, hopefully, eventually. And so I want to bring Rick Doblin in because MAPS not only has begun this process over decades now to first MDMA, working toward that being legalized as an amazing treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And now this process of also training sitters so that we're prepared for a renaissance and legalization and access to these substances again. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick because I think it's important, the history that he has to this conversation.
Wow, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today. It's 35 years, actually. April 8th was the 35th anniversary of MAPS. But I really think about my work in this area as starting 48 years ago, now actually almost 49 years ago, when I read Realms of the Human Unconscious by Stan from my guidance counselor at college. And, you know, the book wasn't actually published till 1975. So my guidance counselor had a manuscript copy and connections to Stan. But to go back even further, I just want to talk a little bit about the history in the 60s. And I think there's been this sense, you know, Stan talked about the 40 pages that he had to add to LSD psychotherapy about the questions about LSD and chromosome damage and cancer and all these things. And I think there's a general misunderstanding that the backlash that came to the psychedelic 60s was because of psychedelics gone wrong, that a lot of people took it unprepared, they had difficult experiences that they weren't ready to process, and that there would be tragedies that did occur. And I think that did happen for sure. The tragedies were vastly exaggerated. People didn't stare at the sun and go blind because of that. That was a made up thing. Art Linklater's daughter didn't commit suicide while she was under the influence of LSD by jumping out a window. That was months later when she was no longer under the influence of LSD, although, you know, potentially the LSD contributed to that, but her another of her siblings also committed suicide. So there was just incredible controversy over psychedelics. And when I look back on it, I think that it was really about psychedelics going right rather than psychedelics going wrong that caused the backlash. And by psychedelics going right, what I mean by that is people having these beyond ego states, this connection to the universe, connection to history, to time, to evolution, that we're all part of this one big picture. And like, you know, we're ants in a ant colony. You know, it's about something bigger than us as a single ant, you know, and then beyond that, we're like a small piece in this, you know, massive, enormous universe. And I think what happened was a lot of people had these experiences under the influence of psychedelics, although it is possible to have without psychedelics, with breathwork, with meditation, with gratuitous grace, any number of unknown causes. But people who had these experiences, particularly young people in the 60s, and this sense of connection to everything that is and to other people, started using that understanding in their political work. And that motivated a lot of the people who were struggling against the Vietnam War and who are the beginnings of the environmental movement. A lot of people got involved in the civil rights movement because of this, or environmental movement. So that it was really psychedelics going right that caused people to work for a better world, that caused people to try to challenge the status quo, that I think caused the backlash. And at the same time, a lot of these experiences that people were having, Stan talked about the birth trauma and the transpersonal states, in the 60s, that was so new. I mean, death was something the time that people didn't talk about, particularly cancer. If you had cancer, it was sort of swept under the rug. You didn't talk about it. The first hospice in the United States wasn't until 1974. So the confrontation with the ego death, with the death rebirth process, people just weren't ready for that in the 60s. Women were tranquilized to give birth, and men were not allowed in the delivery room. So birth was also segmented away. All this was like over medicalized, and the spirit was taken out of it. And at the same time, for those that can remember when the Beatles brought the Maharishi to the United States to teach meditation, that was like a foreign invasion. That was something that just seemed so weird and strange, and these people in these funny costumes, and so meditation was itself not very well practiced or well accepted in the 60s. Now we have mindfulness everywhere, but at the time it was just very controversial. And at the same time, yoga, people were starting to practice yoga, and there was worries that if you practice yoga, you would no longer be a Christian, or you would, be some other religion. So I think it was the content of the psychedelic experiences, what it brought forth, and what it helped motivate people to try to do in the integration process. The culture wasn't ready for it, and they were really involved, in political actions, the young people, particularly about Vietnam. And it just caused the backlash. And there was some parts of it that I'll say were contributed to by the advocates. So while the culture was increasingly trying to suppress any information about the benefits and eventually wiped out the research that Stan and others were doing for multiple decades, there was just this kind of, you could say this, instinctive fear-based reaction. And the advocates, and I'll talk now just about the Good Friday experiment that was done in 1962. And it was, Timothy Leary was the faculty sponsor. It was the first scientific experiment ever done really to look at whether psychedelics can contribute to a spiritual experience. Walter Pahnke was the person that did the experiment. He was a minister and a doctor, and he was working on his Ph.D. And the Reverend Howard Thurman was the minister at Boston University, and he was Martin Luther King's mentor, and he had studied with Gandhi. Reverend Howard Thurman was kind of the key person to try to introduce the concept of nonviolent resistance into the US civil rights movement. And he was very captivated by the role of the spiritual experience in changing people and also in motivating them for political action. And so Reverend Howard Thurman permitted this experiment to take place in the basement chapel during Good Friday experiment. And actually on our MAPS website, I got it from Eva Pahnke, Walter Pahnke's widow. We have a recording of the actual sermon during the Good Friday experiment. And you could listen to Howard Thurman. It's just such a powerful orator. But 20 people, divinity students, came to Marsh Chapel with 10 supporting people who are Walter Houston Clark, Houston Smith, Tim Leary, Ram Dass, Ralph Metzner, a host of others, just incredible. And they all got a pill, half had psilocybin, half had placebo, and 9 out of the 20 people had a mystical experience. Walter spent about a year before the experiment reading the mystical literature of different religious people throughout history and developing a questionnaire for religious mystical experience that is still used today in the research. It just was an incredible contribution. And 9 out of the 20 people had above the cutoff for a mystical experience, and 8 out of those 9 had the psilocybin. And so it definitely proved this point that psychedelics in religiously inclined people in a religious setting could catalyze a mystical experience. And I decided in the 80s, actually, to do a 25-year follow-up to that experiment, and discovered to my surprise that, those people that I could contact, I eventually identified 19 out of the 20 and administered the same questionnaires to them. and the results were almost identical. So that those people that had the mystical experience still considered it to be a mystical experience and had talked about how much they learned from it and how it had contributed to their social justice activism. But I discovered that one of the people that had the psilocybin that didn't have the mystical experience had this very profound experience that he felt that he had to tell people. Part of the ministry, part of the, well, Reverend Howard Thurman's sermon was you have to tell people there's a man on the cross. And he decided that he needed to tell people that, and he needed to tell the president. And since the president wasn't in Boston, he would tell the president of the university. And so he left the room where the service was, and he went running down the road. And this was on Commonwealth Avenue. It's a big avenue, and Tim Leary was, and Houston Smith went out to chase him. And he didn't want to come back inside once they finally got him. And they gave him a shot of Thorazine to bring him in, which at the time was thought to be the way to work. We would never tranquilize people with psychedelics. It just freezes things in place. But that was completely missing from the account of the Good Friday experiment. And so it didn't really come to light till 25 years later when I did this long-term follow-up. And so what that told me is that to some extent, in response to the culture trying to really deny the benefits and exaggerate the risks, Leary and others felt a little bit okay about, or very much okay about exaggerating the benefits sometimes and minimizing the risks. And so I felt that it was important that it shouldn't have, I mean, now when we do research, if there's a serious adverse event, in a sense, if you have to give somebody a tranquilizer, you have to report it. You can't really pretend it never happened. So I think there were some of these contributions from the researchers, but I think it's very much dwarfed by the negative reaction from the culture. And I think the other fundamental mistake was identifying as counterculture, was this kind of thought that when you identify that, you're going to be squashed by the culture. Now our whole thing is about mainstreaming. So it was with all of this in mind, though, that I didn't really wake up. I believed all the propaganda. I believed that LSD causes chromosome damage. I believed when I was a teenager that LSD could cause you to go crazy. If you had 6 or more experiences with LSD, we were told that you were then certifiably insane and that you had to avoid having, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 would be okay, but once you hit this number 6, you are in deep, deep trouble. So I believed all of that. But slowly I started questioning it. And in 1971, I started taking LSD and mescaline. And I had the delusion, of course, that the more drugs you take, the faster you evolve. I didn't really understand the importance of integration. So out of desperation, I went to my guidance counselor and I said, I'm having these difficult trips. I really think I need to keep doing this. But I'm having trouble. I have a hard time letting go. I get scared. I don't know what to do. And this is when the guidance counselor gave me Realms of the Human Unconscious to read. So that's what really changed me. And it was, I think the things that I really loved and appreciated about that book were that, first off, it was science, that it was science looking at these incredible states of consciousness. It had this aspect of looking at the mystical sense of connection and validating that as an important, the whole world of transpersonal psychology. And so that fit in with my political understandings. That was very important. But it had this ultimate, for me, reality check, which was therapy. It was, how do we use all these states of consciousness to actually help people get better? I mean, I remember talking about Krishnamurti, who had this kind of natural spirituality, but he had a harder time teaching people to get there on their own. And so this was these techniques that Stan was talking about with psychedelics to actually help refine people, help bring things to the surface and help them get better and move in this more spiritual direction. It was a path, not just an end goal. So all of this felt that then in a desperate situation, a crazy world, and all this murder and killing and Holocaust and nuclear weapons and all of that, this mystical experience with psychedelics, this spiritual experience, this is a key for healing. And that's where I decided to devote myself to psychedelics. And I asked my guidance counselor if he had any way for me to reach out to Stan, and he had Stan's address. So I wrote to Stan, and Stan wrote me back. I'm this 18-year-old confused little kid doing a bunch of psychedelics, and Stan's MD, Ph.D. at Spring Grove and all, and I was just so lucky. So Stan wrote me back. He had time for that, and told me about a workshop that he was giving, actually with Joan Halifax that summer. So I hitchhiked across America back when you would hitchhike, and I ended up with this workshop with Stan and Joan, and it was just fantastic. But it was at this time I did primal therapy, I did an encounter group. I realized that I needed to start focusing on integration, and so that's basically led for 10 years of my work, building houses, getting into the physical world, just tripping every now and then, seeing as how as I would gather strength, I could do more. And then the next step for me was going back to college to develop a curriculum to study psychedelic therapy, to turn myself into a psychedelic therapist. And it was 1982, 10 years after I dropped out of college. I had no contact with Stan or anybody during this field. I had thought that the backlash had wiped everything out. And I didn't understand that there were underground therapists. So I decided I would start back again at Esalen with a month-long workshop with Stan in 82. And that's, again, changed my life, because that's where I learned about MDMA and learned that it was both a underground tool called Atom as therapy, but it had escaped to be ecstasy and was used in public settings that way. And it was going to be, this was during Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan, and just say no. So the crackdown and the backlash was inevitable. So that's where I started getting more involved politically, and started a nonprofit before MAPS to sue the DEA to keep MDMA legal, and had all these series of meetings at Esalen and these various experiences, and then started MAPS in 86. So just to bring us up to date, I just want to say that on Friday was the first session in Europe. We're trying to bring MDMA assisted therapy to Europe, and Friday was the very first session where it was giving MDMA. It was in the Netherlands. The Czech Republic will probably be next. But in the Netherlands, I got a report Friday night from the psychiatrist doing that work, and saying that the session went great, and it was actually in a police officer. It was a female police officer who had been traumatized from her work, and this MDMA helped her do work to relieve this complex trauma that she had, not just from her work, also from her childhood. And it's just such an auspicious start. And what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks here is the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the world's most important journal for medicine, the highest impact journal, is going to publish an article by Robin Carhart Harris and others from Imperial College. And it is directly comparing psilocybin for depression with SSRIs for depression. And what it's going to show is, obviously, that for those of us that know, that the psilocybin did a lot better than the SSRIs in the exact same kinds of patients, simultaneously treated either with SSRIs or with psilocybin. And it was a double-blind way. Everybody got the people that got SSRIs had a day-long experience with inactive placebo, and everybody that got the psilocybin, also everybody had pills that they took for quite a bit of time. Some were SSRIs, some were placebo. So a double-blind, double-dummy study. And it was just, so New England Journal of Medicine, psychedelics seem to be more effective than SSRIs, than the treatments that we have available. And also in the next week or two, we're going to find out when Nature Medicine, which is also one of the top medical journals, is going to publish our article about MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. And it's from our first phase 3 study. So this is the first time ever that psychedelic psychotherapy has made it into phase 3. Even the work that Stan was doing, the work in the 60s, it was academic research. It wasn't so much drug development research. And now, after all of this backlash for 50 years, what we're showing is that MDMA-assisted therapy is tremendously effective for PTSD, and it's more effective than therapy without MDMA, and that we're on a track to make it approved. One of the things that's a big challenge now is getting permission from FDA to give therapists access to MDMA or to psilocybin or to LSD as part of their training. So what was taken for granted in the Czech Republic and then taken for granted at Hopkins and Spring Grove, that therapists should have their own experiences, we are struggling now to get that approved again by FDA. But I think we will eventually do that, and it looks like it'll be approved in Canada, Israel, elsewhere. And then the last thing I just wanted to say, because we're running out of time, is that this idea of this inner healer and the inner healing intelligence, that I think is one of the most important contributions that Stan has made, and that also comes from the breath work and from the LSD, that you can have all the intentions that you want, and you should be having these intentions, but once you start the experience, you let them go. And then whatever emerges, there's this inner intelligence, this inner logic that the same way we know that our body heals itself below our level of awareness, our psyche has this inner property. And I think the trust in this inner healing process is the most important thing I'd say I've learned from Stan, and that he teaches in the breath work. And so we call our therapy for MDMA inner directed therapy, and we talk a lot about the inner healer and the inner healing intelligence. And so we've had to come up with a brand name for MDMA if it becomes a prescription medicine. It can't be MDMA. And so the brand name that we've chosen is InPath. It's the inner path. And so we've got a trademark on that, but I think that's also part of the legacy from Stan and what we've learned from him about the trusting of the inner path and letting things emerge. And so it's just a great honor to be here with you today. And I'm so glad, Stan, that you are able to have been there near the very beginning, to have seen the backlash, to have been able to work with holotropic breathwork with another technique that was legal to through the dark ages, and then that you've trained through the breathwork most of the or many of the current leading psychedelic therapists, and now you're able to see this renaissance and the emergence into legal prescription medicines coming in a few years. So it's an incredible journey throughout your life to see this whole series of events, and that for you, I think, will really be your legacy, the introduction and the mainstreaming of psychedelics into our culture.
Thank you, Rick. That was wonderful. We don't have much time left, Jim. I know we're really up to the end here. There was so much information to share. And I know I've been watching
All right, we can go a few minutes over.
Okay.
This was so rich, my goodness.
Yeah, there have been a lot of questions in the chat about how do people find, what are the websites? And I'll throw out quickly, the website for our documentary is thewayofthepsychonaut.com. And there's access to live stream archives through just putting in your email, becoming a member, where you can hear our full-length interviews with all the experts in the documentary. Rick is one of them, and there were Q&As following those. I know that, Rick, your website, perhaps you could just mention it to people.
Yeah, maps.org, MAPS, Maps of the World, maps.org.
And Brigitte and Stan, there's the Grof Legacy training.com. Is that the proper website for the original website for the training, groflegacytraining.com? And then Diane, what you're developing in the United States has its own website, but it's in process, correct?
Yes, but it's live.
Okay.
It's up and running. Richard kindly has been posting that in the chat. I don't know if that's the better place to access it. Our website title's a little bit long right now. We're going to be changing that. But basically, I'll say it. It's Grof-Training-USA. And for now, it's on a platform called Kajabi. So after the USA is MY Kajabi, KAJABI.com. But if you want to get in touch with us, it's also a quick way to do it would be info at grof-legacy-training-usa.com.
Perfect.
Thank
Perfect.
you, Susan.
Yeah. So any last words, Stan and Brigitte and Jim?
Yeah, if we have little time.
Little.
I
Please.
wanted to, Rick, thank you so much. I love you. And I couldn't understand how you did it, changing psychedelics all over the world and so on, until we were in Israel with you. We were there for 4 hours, for weekends.
4 weeks.
For weekends. And we were doing breath work, and I was doing some seminars and sessions. And Rick, you have not maybe have an hour there. You were sort of working with psychologists, psychiatrists, politicians. By the time you were also trying to get, trying to get people for research. Both marijuana and also the MDMA was there. And we did this Rafi, we did this. You made this in a hotel. This wonderful dinner with him.
Yeah, with Meshula.
Like somebody who's like an Israeli Albert Hoffman.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe. I mean, you were just sort of all over that time.
Well, it was such a precious opportunity to have you in Israel.
No. And maybe just one thing to Diane. Diane, the amazing thing, when we were working quite a few times to South America, and at the same time there was a terrible crisis, financial and so on, and you were going there basically for nothing. You were
For
just
no payment.
I don't
no
know,
payment.
just maybe getting for airplane and maybe did they feed you that or something, but you were doing it for just for
Passion,
something.
for the love for the work.
And you are not the only one. There are quite a few other people who really love about the breath work. And anyway, I love you all. And this Brigitte, of course, is.
Yeah, I just want to
I
throw
told
out.
her in the movie. I told her, that for me, these last years are just the best time of my life. She has a lot to do with it.
And I can say that we would not have completed the film without Brigitte stepping in and helping us raise money. And, the two of you are just such amazing people. It's such a gift. And Jim, I am so grateful to you for providing this opportunity. I'm new to Stan and his work. And through the course of this tribute, I have the chance of bringing everyone together who've known Stan for such a long period of time. And so my understanding has grown dramatically because of this. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Susan, for convening all these panels. It's really been Susan, everyone, that's had the vision and the inspiration, and then did the hard work to convene everyone together. Because I think everyone I know that knows Stan loves Stan. And so it's really a work of joy and celebration of a great life. And Rick and Diane, thank you so much for your testimonies today, and your deep work and your deep passion about human possibility. And just to touch on one thing you said, Rick, which I think is so important, and I speak as someone who came of age during the 1960s, participated in the student movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement to the fullest extent possible. it was what went right with the psychedelics that was the problem for the authorities, not what went wrong. They took the few exceptions and made them the norm, and then smothered what was arguably the most important breakthrough the human race had come to, possibly since the Renaissance. And I think that's just very worth noting just for a moment, everyone, as you look back over, the 50, 60 years since, Stan and Timothy Leary and all these great pioneers of the spirit, Albert Hoffman brought in a gateway. The American culture split. And while at the cultural and social level, we went through a renaissance, we went through a revolution. The Vietnam War was the first war in recorded history where the young men en masse refused to fight. And you had Esalen, and you had the human potential movement, and you had this flowering of human possibility that really has wrought a great work. If you look at American culture and world culture today, all the things, Rick, that you talked about, like even yoga, is now mainstream. Mindfulness is mainstream. The challenge is that politically, we went in the opposite direction. It's worth remembering that it was during the 1960s that John Kennedy was shot, Martin Luther King was shot, Malcolm X was shot, and Robert Kennedy was shot. And that the president that was elected right as the students were storming the Citadel all over the world in 1968 was Richard Nixon. So there was the breakdown and the breakthrough, it feels to me in retrospect, happened simultaneously with the breakthrough coming at the level of culture and society, gender, the women's movement. But the reactionary counter riptide, you can see almost a straight line between Nixon and Reagan and Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. and then Donald Trump, such that now the United States is more polarized and broken than probably at any time since the Civil War, 150 years ago. And I think that the agony of the world's soul at the moment is that politics seems to be the exception to the kind of breakthrough that the human potential movement, the psychedelics, and all the things that the progressive consciousness has been trying to bring in to the human journey. And so I think, the fact that the holotropic breath work, the psychedelic research is beginning its tentative and slow movement back into acceptance, is really opening up a new opportunity for all of us to mend the wounds that were actually exacerbated during the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and rent the soul asunder. And part of what the impulse of MAPS, the Grof legacy training, Humanity Rising, and all the goodness that is now surging forward into the world right now at a time of pandemic. Again, you see the opposites both moving apart and moving together, and somehow weaving them together is the work of our time among those of us, in many cases, who've taken the necessary psychotropics and done the hard work of meditation and building up, as Plato would say, the enlargement of the soul. So I just wanted to, just bring that in at the beginning, that it feels to me that we're at the completion of a great circle, and the same kind of opportunities in new forms are now in front of us. And it's a beautiful thing to hear your work and your narrative, Stan, and what you've done, Brigitte, and Diane, over and Rick now, over decades. I mean, these people, everyone, are people who've been laboring in the fields of the Lord for decades, day after day, week after week, year after year. And the universe has not forgotten. And all of us now have a historic opportunity at a moment that's now different than the 60s. Because we couldn't mend the wound and exacerbated it, we now have done so much damage to the planet that scientists are telling us we're literally running out of time. And that this next 10 years may be the most crucial 10 years in the history of our kind. So what we're talking about today is not academic. It's actually a national security issue of utmost importance, that we engage in the psychedelic experience. We engage in the holotropic breathwork. We engage in the opening of the world spirit and heart, so that all of us can experience at a world level, just like we're experiencing the pandemic. Wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if in the next year, 2 years, the world went to its opposite and we experienced a renaissance that would lead us into the kind of future that all of us know is possible, at a moment when we are literally teetering on the precipice of choice. So I want to thank you, Stan, for everything that you have been for all of us. You opened up this world with others, but you have emerged as the giant over time. And so I just want to thank you. And Brigitte, thank you for keeping this noble soul in perpetual youth. And Diane and Rick, Susan, I just want to salute you. This has been an important session. You're doing God's work, and I just want to acknowledge it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you
so
all.
much.
Thank you.
Yes. And, we're going to come together again on April 12th. Jim, that was so beautifully said. And so importantly, it's such an important thing to understand that this is really a moment of transformation, collective transformation, that is a death rebirth of humanity's soul, really. And coming up on April 12th is our next tribute to Stan, and the subject is
May
12th. The subject is archetypal astrology, and Will Keepin will bring the aspect of archetypal cosmology, and Becca Tarnas will explain archetypes, and Rand Butler will explain them through the lens of the perinatal matrices. And so it will give some deeper meaning to what you're describing, Jim. It will explain the United States is going through a Pluto return. It will help to give a sense that things happening in the 60s, it's now this cycle that's returning, that here's the chance to take it to the next step. And so, as you say, through Plato's expanded soul, this is an opportunity to expand our understanding of what's at work and how we can participate in this shift. So I am very, very excited for May 12th. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Susan and Jim, thank you again. This is such a reunion, so many wonderful people coming. Oh, amazing. Thank you so much.
It's been a good thing to get the band back together.
Yeah.
And ubiquity is going to the whole world, you know.
Ubiquity, yes.
Bringing spirituality into the world. It's amazing.
Okay, everyone,
Nice
thank
name,
you all.
Ubiquity, yeah.
Yes. Bye-bye. Thank you.
See you again here tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.